Have you ever seen someone slap a Navy SEAL in broad daylight and think they'd get away with it? Because what happened in this parking lot will make your blood boil and your jaw drop. Comment below where in the world you're watching this from and what time it is, because trust me, you'll want to stay for every second of what's about to unfold. It all started on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. Just an ordinary day, the kind where nothing should go wrong, until Elijah Cross, former Navy SEAL, combat-tested and self-disciplined to the core, pulled into a grocery store parking lot. No loud music, no attitude, just a clean park job in an open space. But before he could even shift the gear into park fully, a horn blared behind him, short, sharp, entitled. Elijah's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. That sound wasn't a mistake. It was a challenge. Behind him, a silver SUV sat at a slight angle, as if trying to wedge itself into the same space he'd just taken. He didn't react. Not yet. Years in the military had taught him that silence can be sharper than words. But when he stepped out of the vehicle, she was already there. Karen, Whitmore, mid-40s, platinum blonde bob, oversized designer sunglasses perched on top of her head like a crown of superiority, heels clicking with precision as she marched up to him like she owned the concrete beneath her feet. "Excuse me," she snapped, voice tight with agitation. "That was my spot." Elijah closed the car door slowly, turned to face her without flinching. "Didn't see your name on it," he said evenly, eyes calm but alert. Her lips tightened into a thin, bloodless line. "I was clearly about to park there." "Didn't see a signal," he replied, voice steady. "Plenty of open spots." That should have been the end, but women like Karen didn't back down. They escalated. "You people think you can just take whatever you want without consequences," she spat. And there it was. The line. The invisible line that everyone else sees but people like her pretend doesn't exist. Elijah felt his jaw tighten, but he exhaled slowly through his nose, keeping the storm inside. This wasn't worth it. Not yet. But Karen wasn't done. "This is the problem with this country," she continued, gesturing vaguely as if she was delivering a TED Talk instead of spewing poison. "You move into places you don't belong, you act like you own everything, and the rest of us are just supposed to sit back and let it happen?" Elijah stared at her, letting the silence stretch. She was trying to bait him, drag him down to her level, but he'd learned long ago. Never wrestle with pigs. Still, his patience had limits. "Lady, I parked in an open space," he said finally, his voice low and precise. "That's all that happened here." "No," she hissed, stepping closer, venom rising. "What happened here is another thug thinking the rules don't apply." Elijah's fingers twitched at his sides, but his voice never wavered. "You don't know anything about me." He turned to walk away, unwilling to feed her flames. But her laughter followed, shrill and mocking. "Oh, please, let me guess. You're a good one, right? Served in the military? Think that makes you special?" Elijah stopped, turned, slowly. His voice was calm, but steel-threaded. "I bled for this country, and people like you don't get to tell me I don't belong in it." For the first time, Karen hesitated, just for a flicker of a second, but then straightened her spine and scoffed. "Cry me a river. The military's a joke. You think that makes you better than me? Newsflash, it doesn't." Elijah took another breath. She didn't know how close she was to real danger, not because he would hurt her, but because her arrogance was blinding her to the truth, that he wasn't the one she should be afraid of. Then she made it worse. She poked him in the chest, hard, once, twice. "You think you're tough?" she growled. "You think you're a hero? My husband's on his way, and he's going to show you what a real man looks like." Elijah didn't move, didn't blink, but he saw it now, the gleam in her eyes, the building frenzy. She wasn't going to stop. She wanted a fight. She wanted to be the victim of one. But Elijah had seen this pattern before, in war zones, in interrogation rooms, and, sadly, in suburban parking lots. Karen Whitmore was wound tight, feeding on her own rage, turning a petty disagreement into a crusade. He kept his stance loose, but grounded. "So, let me get this straight," he said calmly. "You're mad because I parked, And instead of just finding another spot, you're throwing a tantrum in public and spewing hate. People like me? What does that even mean?" She didn't answer, just fumed. He could see her biting her tongue, not because she didn't have anything to say, but because saying the truth out loud would expose her for what she was. Then came the final shove. Literal this time. Karen's open palm cracked across Elijah's face. Loud, sharp, audible gasps rippled from onlookers. Elijah stood still. Didn't flinch, just looked at her. Calm, focused, unmoved. And then he said it, quiet, firm, deadly certain. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." She blinked. Her victory cracked. And as her husband's truck pulled into the lot behind her, engine roaring with aggression, Elijah didn't tense. He just smiled, because now the real story was about to begin. Travis Whitmore didn't waste a second. The moment he stepped out of the truck, his boots slammed onto the pavement like a challenge. His chest puffed, jaw clenched, and fists already curling before he even saw the full picture. He wasn't here to ask questions. He was here to swing. Karen pointed dramatically toward Elijah, still rubbing her hand from the slap she'd just thrown. "That's him!" she snarled, voice pitched high with faux distress. "He threatened me." Travis's eyes locked on Elijah like a bull charging red. "You think you can put hands on my wife, boy?" he spat. Elijah didn't move. He simply tilted his head slightly, scanning the man in front of him, mid to late 40s, built like a former linebacker but moving like someone who hadn't exercised discipline in years. All muscle memory, no judgment, and absolutely no idea who he was about to challenge. "She hit me," Elijah said, calm and clear. "Twice. I haven't touched her." But Travis wasn't listening. Men like him rarely did. They heard what they wanted, saw what they feared, and acted on pure ego. With a roar that was more theater than threat, Travis charged. Elijah didn't even step back. He let the man close the distance, watching his form. Sloppy, wild, emotional. The first punch came fast but wide, telegraphed with a shoulder dip so obvious a rookie could have dodged it. Elijah shifted just slightly, letting the swing fly past harmlessly. Travis stumbled forward, momentarily off balance, but recovered with another lunge, another clumsy haymaker aimed high. Elijah moved like water, sidestepping, letting Travis's momentum betray him again. Around them, people had started recording. Phones were up. Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. Karen stood off to the side, mouth open, rage flickering into uncertainty. "Hit him, Travis," she barked. "Do something." But Travis couldn't land a hit, not one. And Elijah? He hadn't even raised a hand. Yet. When Travis came in for the third swing, lower this time, aiming for Elijah's ribs, that's when the tide shifted. Elijah stepped in, one fluid motion, cutting the space and dropping his weight just enough to plant a solid, sharp elbow into Travis's gut. The wind left Travis in a choked grunt. His eyes bulged, knees wobbling. Elijah didn't press the attack, just stood his ground. "Back off," he said, his voice like granite. "Walk away." But pride is a dangerous drug, and Travis had overdosed long ago. He straightened, face red, jaw clenched, and spit out, "You don't tell me what to do, you government dog." That did it. Elijah didn't strike in anger. He struck in clarity, a fast, clean right hook to the jaw, sharp enough to drop Travis without breaking a sweat. The man hit the pavement hard, groaning, limbs limp, ego shattered. Gasps rang out. A few people even cheered quietly. Karen screamed, an unhinged, shrill screech that pierced through the parking lot like sirens. She rushed forward, stumbling to her knees beside her husband, shaking him like a doll. "Travis! Travis! Get up! Oh my God!" But he wasn't getting up. Not yet. Elijah turned away from the spectacle, his chest rising and falling in even breaths. He hadn't wanted this. He didn't start this. But now the world had seen exactly who escalated and who responded. Karen's voice turned venomous again, snapping toward the crowd. Did you see that? He hit my husband. He's a maniac." But the crowd wasn't buying it. Someone called out, "Your husband attacked first." Another said, "We got it all on camera, lady." Karen's eyes darted frantically. She could feel control slipping. She reached into her bag, maybe for her phone, maybe for something else. Elijah's posture shifted just slightly, prepared for anything. But then she hesitated, frozen by the weight of a dozen lenses pointing in her direction. She had wanted an audience. She got one. And now, every second was being recorded. Travis groaned, barely conscious, and Elijah stepped away, calm as ever, like a man walking off a battlefield. Not because he lost, but because there was nothing left worth fighting. The damage was already done, and this story was just getting started. Karen Whitmore was still kneeling next to her unconscious husband when the mask began to crack. Not just the mascara-smudged panic on her face, but the entire act. The fabricated fragility that had worked for her so many times before. She looked up, eyes darting between the crowd and the man who had just dropped Travis without even breaking a sweat. Elijah Cross stood calmly several feet away, posture loose but unshakable, arms still at his sides, breathing controlled. He hadn't run. He hadn't boasted. He hadn't even looked angry. That terrified her more than any raised voice ever could. But she couldn't let this go. She needed to reclaim the narrative, and fast. "Help!" she screamed suddenly, her voice shooting up an octave as she stumbled to her feet. "He attacked us! He's dangerous!" She limped toward the crowd, tears now flowing as if on command, voice trembling with perfectly timed hysteria. "He beat my husband. He grabbed me. He's unhinged. Somebody call the police." Elijah didn't move. He knew exactly what she was doing. He had seen it before, in courtrooms, on deployments, even in boardrooms. The manufactured panic, the performative tears, the weaponization of perception, and he also knew better than to argue. Instead, he simply raised his hand slowly in a gesture of calm, speaking with the same quiet strength he had maintained from the beginning. "Someone already called," he said, nodding toward the crowd. "Good. Let them see everything." Karen's gaze snapped toward him, her expression tightening with a strange mix of hatred and fear. This wasn't going how she had planned. Her voice cracked as she doubled down. "He said he'd hurt us," she cried, now clutching her side as if injured. "He threatened to kill my husband." A murmur passed through the crowd, but this time it wasn't sympathy. It was suspicion. One man near the front folded his arms, clearly unconvinced. A younger woman raised her phone and said firmly, "I've got the whole thing, from the slap to now. You hit him first, lady." Karen froze for half a heartbeat. Her mouth opened, closed, then twisted into something defensive. "You don't understand. He was provoking me." But the tide was turning. Her performance wasn't landing. The cameras were still rolling. The phones were still up. And Elijah still hadn't taken a single step in her direction. Then the distant sound of sirens cut through the air, faint at first, then growing louder, sharper, closer. Karen's eyes widened. She turned toward Travis, still groaning on the ground, and shook him harder. "Get up!" she hissed through clenched teeth. "Get up, damn it!" But he didn't. His body was too heavy with embarrassment, his mind still fogged by impact. Karen stumbled backward as the first police cruiser screeched into the lot, followed by another. Doors opened, boots hit pavement, and in seconds, two officers were striding forward, hands on holsters, eyes scanning the scene. Elijah didn't move. He kept his hands visible, palms out, posture neutral, the way he'd done in dozens of tense standoffs overseas. But this wasn't Kandahar. This was America, and he knew how quickly things could turn. "Sir, step away from the woman," one officer barked. Karen immediately lunged toward the nearest uniform like salvation had just arrived, clutching the officer's sleeve. "He attacked us," she wailed. "He's violent. He hit my husband. He tried to hurt me." The officers turned toward Elijah. Their eyes narrowed. One of them stepped closer, voice tight. "Is that true, sir?" Elijah kept his voice calm. "There are videos. They'll show you what happened. I didn't start this. I defended myself. The officer didn't relax. "Turn around. Hands behind your back. Now." Karen smiled through her fake sobs. Elijah didn't resist. Not because he was guilty, but because he had played this game before, and this time he had the advantage. As the cuffs clicked around his wrists, dozens of phones captured the moment. The same moment that would later be replayed, dissected, and judged by millions. Because what the officers didn't know, what Karen still hadn't realized, was that truth had already gone viral. And justice was just getting started. As the cold steel cuffs tightened around Elijah Cross's wrists, he didn't flinch. He didn't protest, didn't argue, didn't plead. He simply looked straight ahead, his gaze steady, absorbing everything. The crowd's uneasy shifting, the smug twist of Karen Whitmore's mouth as she clung to the officer like a porcelain damsel, and the way Officer Grant's hand hovered just a little too long near his holster. Elijah had been in far worse situations. He knew that survival sometimes meant surrendering, momentarily, so the truth could catch up, and it was catching up fast. Somewhere in that crowd stood a man in a dark polo shirt with a clipped-on name tag. Marcus Hale, the store manager, who had been watching from the doorway the whole time. He stepped forward now, holding up his phone, face calm, voice authoritative. "I saw the whole thing, and so did my security cameras." Officer Ramirez, the one who hadn't drawn conclusions yet, turned toward him. "You recorded it?" Marcus nodded. "Everything. From the first shout to the first punch. And from what I saw, this man never laid a hand on that woman until he had to defend himself." Karen's face paled. She stepped back from the officer she was clinging to. "Wait. No. He's twisting this. You didn't see what happened before." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Lady, I saw you slap him, twice. I saw your husband charge him like a lunatic. I saw you lie." Officer Grant hesitated. His hand moved away from his holster and his gaze flicked uncertainly between Marcus and Elijah. "We'll need that footage," he said, his tone suddenly more cautious. "And anyone else who recorded will need to collect statements." From around the lot, phones began to lower, heads nodded. Several people stepped forward, ready to speak. Karen's breath hitched. The crowd was no longer on her side. Elijah, still in cuffs, stood motionless, but something in his posture shifted, subtle, like the first sign of a rising tide. Officer Ramirez turned to his partner. "We need to take those cuffs off." "Hold on," Officer Grant replied, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden shift in momentum. "We need to verify everything first." "No," Ramirez said more firmly. "This man cooperated. He's standing here calmly, and we have at least 5 witnesses saying he's the victim." Grant hesitated again, but the pressure was building. He relented, stepping behind Elijah and releasing the cuffs. The second they clicked open and dropped from his wrists, Elijah didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just rubbed the stiffness from his hands and looked Karen in the eyes with a calm that cut deeper than rage ever could. Her face twisted, desperation creeping in. "This isn't fair," she screamed. "He's lying. They're all lying." "We've got footage," Marcus repeated. "And you're going to look real stupid once it goes online." Karen turned toward the nearest officer again. "He's threatening me. Did you hear that?" But her voice cracked now, not with rage, but with fear. The script she'd used all her life was failing, and worse, she knew it. Ramirez gave her a tired look. "Ma'am, I suggest you stay calm. You're not helping yourself." Karen's jaw dropped. She looked around wildly, as if searching for someone to step in and save her from the truth. But there was no one left. Travis, her husband, was still groaning on the ground, barely able to lift his head. Elijah stood tall, unshaken. The crowd was silent, watching, recording, remembering. Officer Grant finally stepped forward, his voice taut. "We'll be taking both you and your husband in for questioning. There's enough here to warrant it." Karen's eyes widened. "What? I'm the victim." But the cuffs came anyway, and this time they weren't on Elijah. They were on her. And the click of the metal wasn't just a sound, it was a statement. That the game had changed. That the world had changed. That sometimes justice didn't come with flashing lights or raised voices, but with patience, truth, and people finally refusing to look away. Karen Whitmore stood frozen, the cuffs biting into her wrists not nearly as sharply as the weight of realization now crashing down on her. Her eyes darted wildly, as if searching for a lifeline, a loophole, a friendly face in the crowd, but there were none. The smartphones still aimed her way didn't blink. The bystanders, once uncertain, were now firmly on Elijah's side, their silence louder than judgment. She opened her mouth to protest again, but the officers were no longer listening, not to her. Officer Ramirez had already crouched beside Travis, checking his vitals, speaking into his radio for medical backup. Elijah, standing off to the side, watched it all unfold with the same quiet focus he'd maintained from the beginning. No gloating, no anger, just control, measured, unshaken. Karen tried again, her voice cracking. "I didn't do anything wrong. He was aggressive. He scared me." But her words fell flat, echoing back at her like hollow theater. Officer Grant led her gently but firmly toward the squad car. Her heels scraped against the pavement, the walk of shame beginning before her mind could catch up. And still, the cameras followed. Elijah turned slightly, his eyes meeting Marcus Hale's. The store manager gave him a small, approving nod. "I've got your back," he said. "I've already emailed the footage to both officers, and I've got backup copies too. No one's twisting this story on my watch." Elijah nodded once. "Appreciate it." A beat passed. Then Marcus added, "You kept your cool. That wasn't easy, especially after she slapped you." Elijah exhaled slowly, rubbing his wrists. "Anger's easy. Discipline takes practice." A medic arrived, checking on Travis, who was now sitting up but clearly disoriented. His jaw was bruised, his pride more so. As they tried to lift him, he waved them off, staggering to his feet with a grunt. "Don't touch me," he snapped, his voice thick with humiliation. His eyes found Elijah, and for a moment the parking lot seemed to shrink down to just the two of them. Travis stared, not with vengeance, but something worse. Confused resentment. He had expected to win, to dominate, to walk away the hero defending his wife. But instead, he had been exposed as nothing more than a loud, untrained fool swinging wildly into a storm he didn't understand. He opened his mouth to speak, but the officer beside him was already guiding him toward a second squad car. As he passed Elijah, he muttered low enough for only him to hear, "This ain't over." Elijah didn't respond. He didn't need to, because it was over, at least for now. The truth had teeth, and they had just sunk deep into the lie Travis and Karen had tried to spin. With both of them in custody, the crowd began to disperse. But not before a few people came up to Elijah. Some offering quiet nods of respect, others simply murmuring, "We saw everything," or "You handled that better than I could have." Elijah gave them small acknowledgments, never letting the moment swell his ego. It wasn't about winning, it was about standing firm when everything in the world tried to knock you off balance. Officer Ramirez approached again, this time with a softer demeanor. "Mr. Cross," he said, "I want to apologize for earlier. We acted fast based on what we saw, but we should have asked more questions before putting cuffs on you." Elijah studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "You did your job. Now just make sure you finish it right." Ramirez nodded. "You have my word." Paperwork was exchanged, statements were taken, and before long Elijah was left standing by his car. The windshield was still intact, but the day's events had cracked something larger. A long-standing illusion that people like Karen could spin truth into fiction and get away with it. Not today. Elijah opened his car door, slid into the driver's seat, and took a deep breath. The seat molded around him, familiar and grounding. He gripped the steering wheel not out of tension, but closure. The war wasn't over, but this battle? This one belonged to him. Elijah Cross didn't drive away immediately. He just sat there for a moment in the driver's seat, his fingers tapping lightly against the wheel, letting the engine hum beneath him. The police cruisers pulled away first, red and blue lights fading into the distance, each flash a signal that something had changed. Not just for him, but for everyone who had watched the incident unfold. The parking lot slowly emptied, though a few bystanders still lingered, whispering, replaying the scene in hushed tones like it was some urban legend they'd just witnessed firsthand. Elijah looked at his rearview mirror, not to check for traffic, but to take in the silence, the stillness, the way the world always seemed to pause right after something seismic. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pulled out. The tires glided over the asphalt with a quiet smoothness, but his mind was already racing. Not with rage or revenge, but with logistics. The legal aftermath would be messy. He knew that. But he also knew how to prepare. He'd faced bureaucracies more ruthless than suburban law enforcement. His first stop wasn't home. It was his lawyer's office. Rachel Monroe had been his legal counsel ever since he left the Navy. Smart, sharp, unshakable, with the kind of calm that could dismantle entire arguments in court without ever raising her voice. She was already waiting when he arrived. "Saw the video," she said simply, offering him a glass of water instead of small talk. "It's all over Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok. Multiple angles. The narrative is clear. They came at you, you kept your composure, and when you defended yourself, you did it with precision." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Didn't even know I was trending." "You are," she said, "and for once that's a good thing. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly on your side, which means we strike now." She handed him a file. "I'm filing for civil damages. Assault, defamation, emotional distress, plus the viral aspect. And given the fact that they tried to weaponize law enforcement against you, we'll pursue additional claims. False accusation with intent to escalate racial tension." Elijah didn't smile, but a small shift in his posture suggested something close. "You're thorough." Rachel shrugged. "I've had practice, but Elijah—" "This isn't just about money. You know that, right?" He nodded. "It's about precedent." "Exactly." She tapped the file. "They thought their performance would be enough, that they could act out, break the law, spin the narrative, and come out looking clean. But this time, the world saw the truth, and the truth doesn't go away." After they signed the documents, Elijah drove home. He didn't blast music or make calls. He just drove, the windows down, letting the air cool his skin and clear his thoughts. The adrenaline had long since faded, but a new energy had replaced it. Something firm, anchored. That night, as he scrolled through social media, he saw the clips again. His face, calm and steady, frozen mid-frame beside headlines like "Navy SEAL Handles Racist Couple with Dignity" and "When Silence is Power," the Elijah Cross story. Comments poured in, some outraged, many supportive, some deeply personal. Veterans, young black men, working moms, even former cops. People who had seen themselves in him. People who had been waiting to see someone like Karen held accountable. Elijah wasn't one for the spotlight, but he understood its value. And this was a moment that mattered. He paused when he saw a post from Westridge Realty, Karen Whitmore's employer. A formal statement. Termination effective immediately. Condemnation of her behavior. Zero tolerance for discrimination. Another notification followed minutes later. Danning and Sons Construction had also issued a release. Travis was out too. Elijah set the phone down. 2 careers ended not because of a vendetta, but because of the truth. The consequences hadn't just caught up. They'd hit like a freight train. He leaned back on his couch, exhaling slow and deep. The fight wasn't over. Court was coming. Headlines would rise and fall, and the internet would eventually move on. But for now, justice had taken root. And for the first time in a long time, Elijah allowed himself to feel it. Not vengeance, not victory, but something quieter. Resolution. The courtroom was colder than Elijah Cross expected. Not in temperature, but in energy. The sterile stillness of marble floors and polished benches. The muted shuffle of papers and distant murmurs of anticipation. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the world didn't need them now. The footage had already done its job. Public opinion had shaped the atmosphere like invisible pressure, and everyone in the room felt it. Elijah sat beside his attorney, Rachel Monroe, calm and composed, wearing a simple navy suit that mirrored his demeanor, clean, professional, quietly powerful. Across the room sat Karen and Travis Whitmore, though they hardly looked like the people from that parking lot anymore. Karen's once perfect hair was pulled into a taut bun, her face gaunt, shoulders slumped. Travis sat beside her, his jaw still faintly discolored from the strike that had brought him down. Their lawyers whispered urgently, but the panic was already behind their eyes. The judge entered, and the room rose. When it came time to speak, Rachel did most of the talking. She laid out the facts with surgical clarity: the assault, the defamation, the lies, the attempted manipulation of law enforcement, and the emotional toll of being handcuffed despite doing nothing wrong. She brought up the recordings, dozens of them. She cited precedent. She cited the damage. And then she sat down. Karen's attorney tried to pivot, claimed emotional distress, confusion, miscommunication, claimed Karen had overreacted in the heat of the moment and that she had no intention of causing harm. The judge listened with the stoic patience of someone who'd heard every version of that excuse before, and when the verdict came, it landed like a stone. Guilty on all civil counts. Karen was ordered to pay restitution for defamation, for Elijah's legal fees, for emotional harm. Travis, too, for assault, property damage, and reckless endangerment. Together, they owed Elijah over $75,000. But the money wasn't the real punishment. It was what came after: a restraining order, mandatory sensitivity training, community service hours, their mugshots circulating the internet again, their reputations annihilated. Karen began sobbing as the ruling was read. Travis stared ahead, unmoving, a statue of shame. Elijah, in contrast, simply nodded once, slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, their cameras waiting, their questions loud. Elijah didn't stop for interviews. He didn't grandstand. He walked past them all, his face unreadable, until he reached the street. He took in a breath of air that tasted freer than anything he'd had in months. A few days later, the wire transfer came through. The funds from Karen and Travis's liquidated assets hit his account with a cold finality. Elijah didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He used a portion of the settlement to replace his windshield. Another part went toward a donation for a local youth boxing gym. Somewhere young men could learn control, discipline, and self-respect before the world tested them like it had tested him. He bought a new car, too, not out of vanity, but because it symbolized a clean chapter, a machine untouched by the mess they tried to drag him through. Weeks passed, the headlines faded, the social media frenzy cooled, but the story never really disappeared. Because what happened that day had become something larger. Schools used the footage for anti-discrimination lessons. Podcasts unpacked the psychology of the encounter. Commentators replayed Karen's meltdown like a tragic monologue from a play about privilege. And Elijah? He stayed quiet. He went back to his work, his routine, his peace. One evening, he drove through the neighborhood where the Whitmores once lived, now silent, their house listed for sale, grass overgrown, mailbox dented. As he paused at a red light nearby, he heard shouting from an open window down the street. Familiar voices. Karen and Travis arguing again, voices ragged, exhausted, desperate. "You ruined everything," Travis barked. "You just had to run your mouth." "Me?" Karen shrieked. "You're the one who threw a rock like a lunatic." Elijah didn't react. He didn't even look. He just let the light turn green and drove on, because their downfall wasn't his closure. His closure was knowing he never had to become what they accused him of being. He had stood tall when everything tried to drag him low, and in doing so, he didn't just defend himself, he became an example, not of strength, but of restraint, of integrity, of what it means to walk through fire and come out clean. What would you have done if you were in Elijah's shoes? Do you think justice was truly served, or does this story reveal deeper issues we still need to confront? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your voice. And if you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss the next story that needs to be told.